West Oakland, California, 1951. 6-year-old Luis Albino spends the afternoon at a neighborhood park with his 10-year-old brother Roger, only a year after their families moved from Puerto Rico. The boys play in the sandbox and run across the grass, unaware that their ordinary day is about to fracture their family forever. As they play, a Spanish-speaking woman in her early 30s approaches, a bright bandana tied over her hair. She greets the boys warmly, asks their ages, and speaks in a tone that feels familiar to children who hear Spanish at home. Roger watches her cautiously, but Luis responds with trust when she smiles and offers conversation. The woman continues engaging them before promising to buy candy if they walk with her. Luis accepts the offer without hesitation, while Roger lingers behind, uneasy as the woman leads his brother away. When he realizes she is guiding Luis toward unfamiliar streets and increasing her pace, Roger's fear sharpens. He stops, turns back, and sprints home to alert their mother, Antonia. Breathless, he explains in frantic Spanish what happened, and Antonia rushes to the park. She finds no trace of her youngest son. Neighbors recall seeing a woman walking away with a small boy, but each assumed she was his mother. Antonia calls for help, and police arrive, struggling at first to understand her due to the language barrier. Still, the consistency of Roger's account and the seriousness of a missing child compel officers to initiate a citywide search that very night. The Albino family stands at the edge of a nightmare, shocked by how quickly their world changed. The disappearance leaves neighbors unsettled, officers mobilizing rapidly, and Antonia overwhelmed by fear, disbelief, and the desperate hope that swift action might bring her son back before the trail begins to fade. The first hours after Luis vanished pushed Oakland police into an urgent and rapidly expanding investigation. Officers began by canvassing the park where he was last seen, questioning anyone who might have observed the woman in the bandana or the direction she took. They moved door to door through nearby streets, asking residents whether they had noticed a young boy walking with an unfamiliar adult. Because stranger abductions were extremely uncommon in 1951, some officers initially wondered whether Roger had misunderstood what he saw. Yet his repeated description of a Spanish-speaking woman wearing a bandana remained consistent every time they questioned him, eventually convincing investigators that the situation was not a misunderstanding, but a genuine disappearance requiring immediate action. As the search widened, assistance came from unexpected places. Soldiers from a nearby U.S. Army base volunteered to join the effort, helping officers scour blocks, yards, alleys, and open fields. Coast Guard teams were dispatched to search the bay for any possibility of an accidental drowning, a scenario Antonia firmly rejected. Despite her objections, divers methodically checked waterfront edges and shallow areas while patrol boats scanned the surface for any trace of a child. Radio stations broadcast bulletins announcing Luis is missing, prompting neighbors to search garages, sheds, and side streets. Yet despite the combined effort of civilians, soldiers, and law enforcement, no evidence was recovered. Throughout these early days, police repeatedly interviewed Roger because he was the only eyewitness. He could only give the same details again and again, unable to add anything new that might guide investigators. Without Amber Alerts, security cameras, or modern DNA technologies, detectives struggled to advance the case. After 2 days, the Oakland Tribune carried the story nationally, but even with wider attention, no solid leads emerged, and the investigation began to cool. After the initial search faded and the case turned cold, Antonia refused to surrender hope. For months, she visited the police station every single morning, asking whether anyone had found new information about her missing son. When daily visits became unsustainable, she shifted to weekly trips, and as the years passed, those visits eventually became annual. Officers came to recognize her immediately, understanding her as the mother who never stopped searching, even when investigators had nothing left to pursue. With no new leads, the family chased every rumor. Around 1966, when Luis would have reached draft age, relatives searched military records hoping his name might appear, believing that compulsory registration might offer a clue. Other family members even traveled back to Puerto Rico, imagining that the kidnapper could have returned there with the child. But these efforts produced no answers. Missing posters deteriorated, interest diminished, and official records remained unchanged as the decades continued. Throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Antonia never let the memory of her son fade. She kept his photograph displayed on her wall and prayed daily, holding tightly to old newspaper clippings from 1951 that documented the early days of the investigation. The transcript describes how deeply the disappearance affected Roger, who carried lasting guilt for being unable to stop the woman who led Luis away. As new generations were born, the story of Uncle Luisito became a permanent part of family history. Even relatives who had never met him grew up knowing his name and the sorrow surrounding his disappearance. When Antonia died in 2005 at age 92, she still believed her son was alive somewhere. Her persistence, suffering, and unwavering faith defined the family's decades-long struggle to understand what had happened to Luis. According to the transcript, the woman who abducted Luis transported him across the country by airplane, something remarkably easy to do in 1951, because identification requirements were minimal and security procedures were far less restrictive than they would become in later decades. After the flight, Luis was placed with a couple on the East Coast who raised him as their own child. The transcript does not clarify whether this couple knew he had been kidnapped, and that uncertainty remains one of the lingering questions surrounding the case. Growing up under a different name, Luis adapted fully to the life presented to him. He learned English, attended school, and gradually forgot the earliest memories of his childhood in West Oakland. His upbringing appeared typical from the outside, and nothing in his environment suggested that his origins were anything other than what he had been told. As he grew older, he eventually entered the U.S. Marine Corps. There he served 2 tours in Vietnam, completely unaware that his real family had once speculated he might appear in draft records during the 1960s. After completing his military service, Luis continued building a stable life. He became a firefighter, established a career, married, and raised children who later gave him grandchildren. Every stage of his adult life was shaped by the identity he believed was genuine, and the transcript emphasizes that he had no knowledge of his abduction. By the time the truth began to surface decades later, his adoptive parents had already passed away, leaving unresolved questions about what they knew, how they received him, and whether they ever understood the circumstances behind his arrival. Luis lived securely under the only identity he ever recognized, unaware of the history that would eventually return to him in 2020. The mystery surrounding Luis's disappearance began to unravel in 2020 when his niece Alita took an ancestry DNA test simply for fun, as described in the transcript. When the results arrived, the database revealed a 22% match with an unfamiliar man. The number was far too high to be coincidental, indicating that the match had to be her missing uncle or another very close relative. Alita sent a message through the testing platform, hoping to receive clarification, but no reply ever came. 4 years passed without progress. Then in 2024, renewed curiosity led Alita and her daughters to revisit the matter more seriously. They went to the Oakland Public Library, searched old records, and collected newspaper clippings from 1951. They compared childhood photographs of Luis with any available information associated with the DNA match. The similarities combined with the genetic data convinced them that they had uncovered something significant. On March 18, 2024, Alita gathered all the material she had compiled and presented it to the Oakland Police Department. The information prompted the official reopening of the missing person case after 73 years. Because the disappearance involved a child taken across state lines, both the FBI and the California Department of Justice joined the renewed investigation. Eventually, Luis agreed to provide a DNA sample. When the results were processed, they conclusively confirmed that he was indeed Luis Armando Albino, missing since 1951. After decades of uncertainty, the truth had finally surfaced. On June 20, 2024, Alita received the official confirmation from the authorities. Her uncle was alive, nearly 80 years old, and living under an identity he had believed in his entire life. The transcript makes clear that this discovery brought the long-standing mystery to an astonishing and unexpected resolution. Luis flew to California on June 24, 2024, bringing an end to a separation that had lasted 73 years. When he arrived, he met his niece Alita, the relatives who had helped uncover the truth, and the sister who had waited decades to learn what happened to him. Their meeting was filled with emotion, shaped by the mixture of relief, disbelief, and gratitude that accompanied his unexpected return. The next day, Luis met his brother Roger, now 83. According to the transcript, the two men embraced for a long time, holding on to the moment that had been denied to them for most of their lives. During their time together, Luis thanked Alita for finding me, acknowledging the persistence and dedication that led to the discovery of his true identity. The family shared photographs, memories, and the story of their mother Antonia's lifelong search for the son she never stopped believing was alive. These conversations helped bridge the decades that had separated them, giving Luis a clearer understanding of the history he never knew. The reunion carried a bittersweet dimension. Roger passed away weeks later, in August 2024, but he did so after finally seeing his brother again. The case remains technically open, yet meaningful prosecution is unlikely. The woman who abducted Luis in 1951 is almost certainly deceased, and the adoptive parents who raised him are also gone, leaving the motives behind the kidnapping unresolved. Although legal justice may never be possible, the transcript emphasizes that the family gained the emotional closure they had sought for generations. The conclusion of this case fulfilled Antonia's belief that her son was still alive and marked one of the longest missing child investigations ever resolved, with the victim found living under a different identity.